It seems there isn't all that much we know in regards to black holes. We know it's a dense object in which no light can escape. And given that no light can escape, it's led scientists and astronomers to believe that anything that gets sucked into a black hole, or by a black hole rather, has absolutely no way of coming back out. In fact, we don't even know where black holes lead to and what happens when you get sucked into one. We've made educated guesses and have studied them since first discovering them back in 1916, but still, we really don't know all that much about them and have spent the majority of our research trying to understand what happens to things around black holes right up until they vanish into thin air. In this case, thin air is the black hole. So as you can imagine, if the Earth entered a black hole, well, it definitely wouldn't bode well for anyone, including you watching this video. Today on Life's Biggest Questions, we're asking, what if Earth entered a black hole in 2021? So I think it's safe to say if Earth entered a black hole in 2021, that'd be the end of our planet and everything on it. Just like our livelihood is wiped clean right off the slate of the universe, and anything or everything that once existed on Earth no longer exists. Odds are the same can be said for our entire solar system, assuming that not only Earth but the Sun, as well as every other planet and possibly even Pluto, gets sucked into the black hole which has somehow been formed. Now this would only be possible if the mass of said black hole outweighed the mass of whatever it was sucking in. Meaning technically if somehow the Sun was turned into a black hole, technically speaking, we wouldn't be sucked in, assuming it has the same mass as the Sun. It's not that black holes necessarily have a sucking motion of sorts like a vacuum where there's an actual force, if you will, trying to grab anything within a certain vicinity. But in a sense there is a force, and that force is the black hole's gravitational pull. Going back to the Sun being replaced by a black hole, assuming they have the same gravitational pull, then our planets wouldn't be sucked into said hole, but there'd be no light and, well, it would still suck. Going back to Earth and the black hole, let's first look at how they form. At the end of a star's life, we're talking billions of years. Eventually the star runs out of fuel to burn through and collapses in on itself, forming a very small dense point. This is the heart of the black hole, and at the heart of this black hole is where the unknown happens. What we do know is the heart of said black hole is incredibly dense, and the strength of how much or what around the black hole gets pulled in depends on what kind of black hole we're talking about. There are the smaller black holes, which are the stellar mass black holes, and have a mass 10 times the size of the Sun. Then there are the supermassive black holes, which we don't know all that much about aside from the fact that they are found at the center of galaxies and have a mass which can weigh millions or even billions the weight of the Sun. Depending which black hole we're talking about determines how they're formed and how long it takes. A stellar mass black hole can be formed in seconds after the collapse of a massive star. The supermassive black holes are a bit more of a mystery, as there is no real indication of how long it takes one to form. That being said, they could reach incredible sizes in less than 1 billion years, which although seems like an eternity, in space terms, it's not all that long. At the end of the day, Earth entering a black hole is bad news regardless of the year. And truthfully, depending on the size of said black hole, would determine how quickly things change or get destroyed, I guess you could say. But at the end of the day, if Earth entered a stellar mass black hole or a supermassive one, I think it's safe to say we'd all die. No, I can guarantee it. But here's the thing, I actually can't. As I previously mentioned, we don't know all that much about black holes and study what happens to things around them before they ultimately disappear, which helps us somewhat understand what we're dealing with. Still though, it seems we don't really know much about anything. From a scientific standpoint, it seems everyone and everything on Earth would be what is referred to as being spaghettified, I think. The scientific term is spaghettification, as what happens when something enters a black hole is exactly that. Things get compressed horizontally while simultaneously being stretched vertically, thus making things appear to look as if they were spaghetti. So it seems if the Earth entered a black hole, things would slowly start to get stretched and compressed at the same time. Odds are we'd notice a shift in gravity as the Earth would start moving much quicker than it normally does before the spaghettification happened. That's how you say it, right? Spaghettification? Yeah, I think I got it. Given that we would enter into a new, stronger gravitational pull than that of the Sun, everything on Earth would drastically change before anything turns into long string noodles. For example, there wouldn't be much sunlight, if at all, because we'd be pulled from the Sun. The waves would also be all out of whack because the moon no longer appears either, and all in all, the entire world would be apocalyptic way before we actually got to the center of the black hole, which at that point there wouldn't be a single remnant left of Earth or its existence. Now thankfully we have professionals whose goal is to ensure the safety of the human race from crazy space stuff that us regular folks just don't understand. And you could put black holes under that category because even the best of the best don't know what they're dealing with. That being said, if there was even the slightest chance that the human race and Earth as a whole was inevitably doomed, we'd certainly try to find ways around our fate. If that means going out to Mars and trying to colonize it, find another planet to potentially live on, or making some sort of technology that allows us to live in space, which I don't know what that could be, but hey, they'd try it. Now given that it's pretty much November 2020, we'd have to hope that this happened at the end of 2021. You know, we want as much time as possible to figure things out. Now, not that a year's time on Earth would likely make that much of a difference when it comes to black holes pulling us in. From If it were to happen in 2021, we would definitely be feeling the effects currently and likely for decades prior. The world wouldn't be what it is today, and truth be told, we'd all be long gone way before we figure out how things would play out for us. But here's the great thing about black holes. We think we know what happens when things go inside of them, but we don't know for sure. Which makes this question incredibly open-ended, meaning now that we got all the realistic and science-based stuff out of the way, the real fun begins. And I know you guys are gonna say I sound a little crazy with what I'm about to say, but I mean really there's no way of knowing for sure, and yes, I trust science, but I'm also a creative, which means I have a hell of imagination. Of course, this brings us to my next point. Somehow, someway, Earth goes through the black hole, and we all think we're inevitably going to die, so likely some people just take the initiative and do it themselves, out of fear the inevitable is going to be much more painful. But for those of us who somehow find a way to survive, again, assuming there is no sun and Earth's orbit increases, so things start flying all over the place, but somehow we still survive, well, we'd find out what's on the other end of a black hole. And assuming it's not death and destruction, maybe it's an alternate reality. Maybe we get thrown into a new universe or galaxy where things are similar, or maybe they're completely different. What I'm hoping for is that we just get thrown onto another version of Earth, in a sense, an alternative reality or another dimension. Given that space is everlasting and there is no real end to it that we're aware of, who knows what's really on the other side of a black hole? There is so much unknown about it that all we could really do is speculate, and although it seems the common answer is death, again, there really is no way of knowing for sure. But for a more scientific explanation, I'm going to quote Alvaro Diaz, who is a particle physics student from the University of Warsaw. Again, given that we don't know much, even he admitted it's hard to say for sure, but when speaking on if Earth were to fall into a black hole, he said the following. This is where things get very tricky and bizarre. From our point of view, nothing would happen at the beginning, since we will be falling very slowly, just like we are ever so slightly falling into the sun currently. As we would get closer to the black hole, the tidal forces would be so great that Earth would no longer stay in one piece, and would separate into smaller chunks. Kind of like asteroids falling into the black hole. This happens because the difference in gravitational attractions between different parts of Earth would be much greater than the forces keeping it together. Which yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense, and this man is studying the field of work in which I know very little of, but still, I think the alternative reality is just like a way cooler idea, you know? Like, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't know, I just think particles of Earth going all over the place, people dying, or like, you just go to Earth and I'm just like, you're me. And it's like that Spider-Man meme where there's just two of me and I'm just like, I think that'd be pretty cool, but you know, the science answer is fine too, I guess. What I do know is that we're fine, and as bad as of a year as 2020 has been for some of us, odds are 2021 will be much better all around. No pandemic, no black holes. All in all, we'll just all be healthy and happy and living a great life, assuming it ends in 2021. Really, who knows, but I'm just trying to be positive here, guys.
Well, the world is ending. Two halves, slowly drifting apart. It's a cinematic way to end everything we know. Of course, gravity would prevent anything like a clean cut from actually happening, but it is a striking image. Envision how this might happen. Everyone's got a different approach. Maybe a godly samurai is testing out his newly forged katana, steel folded 1 billion times. Perhaps an alien race decides they want to put their huge laser weapon to work. Or it could even be another asteroid, one way bigger and more precise than the one that took out the dinosaurs. It's the stuff of sci-fi legend, but we are going to try to get to the bottom of it today. Hello fellow friends and philosophers, and welcome back to the most mind-bending channel on YouTube, Life's Biggest Questions. I'm your voice in the void, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to be asking the question, what if the Earth was cut in half? Crazy, I know. The likelihood of the Earth being cut in half is astronomically low. There are no implements in existence, at least that we know of, that are capable of slicing a planet clean in two. Even if someone developed a gigantic blade that could potentially saw through the Earth if given enough time, it would reach a point where cutting no longer works. There's more water on the surface of the Earth than anything else, and once you get to the core, you're dealing with temperatures so extreme that any tools you brought down with you would likely cease to work. Tough break, I know. But yeah, there really is no way to realistically model how the Earth might actually be cut in half. So we'll have to go into the realm of the hypothetical to find some answers on this particular question. And what better place to start than with a cheesy 60s disaster movie? One can only hope that the world ends thanks to some harebrained scheme cobbled together by hubris-fueled scientists. In the 1965 flick Crack in the World, we find out that decades of underground nuclear tests have potentially weakened the crust of the Earth. A crack team of scientists, are attempting to harness Earth's geothermal energy by drilling deep down into its core. During these experiments, they come across an unfortunate barrier, a crazy dense layer of material. The project lead, a desperate man secretly dying of cancer, decides that it's time to blast it with an atomic device, and guess what? This detonation causes the crust to crack along a fault line. All sorts of earthquakes and tidal waves ravage the Earth, and the scientists try to figure out if the crack will make it beyond the fault. If this were the case, the crack could make it all the way around the Earth's perimeter, causing land masses to split. And if that happened, oceans would then be sucked in, and enough steam to tear apart the Earth would be generated. Dramatic, right? It's not very likely that this would be the case, but hey, it's a fun place to start. Plus, at the end of a crack in the world, a gigantic piece of the planet is broken off and forms a new moon. Wicked. Now that we've put the Hollywood version out there, let's consider a few other ways this could go down. What if suddenly, for no good reason, the Earth split in two? Like maybe the samurai I mentioned earlier decided it really was time to slice and dice. What then? A clean cut down the middle with the two halves existing independently for a moment. Well, if that did happen, it's likely they'd just come crashing back together. Gravity would essentially prevent them from floating too far in any direction, so we'd still have an Earth, albeit one with a big ol' scar down the middle. Oh, and the results on the surface would be nothing short of catastrophic. Two bodies of that size colliding would cause a lot of issues. Think about it. Even from very close, the immense weight of the Earth running into itself would send shockwaves around the globe. Earthquakes and tidal waves would rock our world, and they wouldn't stop for a long time. Something like this might not end all life on Earth, but it would kill a whole lot of people and destroy pretty much everything. Cutting the Earth in half like that and letting the halves come back together would basically be a hard reset for surface dwellers. Another potential option would be to take the two halves and move them a significant distance apart. In this case, each half would become its own little planet. Two tiny spherical Earths, each spilling molten core out into space for a little bit. Doesn't that sound like fun? Eventually they would reach some sort of equilibrium and begin orbiting in a binary system of sorts. Each would rotate around the center of mass, which would be the center of the two halves. Probably. I'm no scientist. Oh, and the moon would likely fly off into space without one single Earth to orbit. It'd probably end up colliding with another celestial body at some point. Damn, I'm gonna miss the moon. Speaking of missing stuff, I'm also gonna miss life as we know it. A cataclysmic event like the Earth splitting in two won't allow for us to return to normal life. Now, even if people survive, they're gonna have a rough go. If people survive. But in the event that folks are still around, we're gonna be living two different existences on two different planetary bodies. Trade routes, out the window. Families, forever divided. Satellite broadcasts and internet connectivity, forget about it. In fact, the splitting and reorganizing of landmass will provide a brand new world for everyone. Hell, some of the exposed molten core will have to cool on the surface, creating new land. Whether any of it will be useful or even survivable is up in the air. Probably not, but hey, it's always nice to have hope. In the end, if the Earth was cut in half, we'd have one hell of a conversation topic. How did this happen? Who was that samurai? Did aliens make first contact? Do you think that tidal wave will crush me and my home? Oh, it'll be a fun time. If we do survive, there will be plenty of adjusting to do. Figuring out if you're on planet A or planet B, followed by a total reorganization of pretty much everything, should be a blast. Scientists would set out to figure out exactly how this happened and then get into the nitty-gritty of the physical implications of such an event, and of course the economy would take a phenomenal hit. That seems to be the main concern for a whole lot of folks, but what can you do? Well, that just about sums up the Earth slicing idea. There is a lot more to consider if you want to explore a lot of the deeper implications, but I'll keep it light for today.
The Milky Way. It's believed to be 100,000 light years across. There's a massive black hole right in the middle of it. And it's also the home to our solar system as well as our beloved Earth. Now we know the Earth is located in the habitable zone of the solar system, and for those of you unaware, we sit in one of the two smaller spurs in the galaxy called the Orion Arm. The Orion Arm sits between two of our galaxy's major arms, Perseus and Sagittarius. In regards to the middle of the galaxy, Earth is about 25,000 to 28,000 light years away from it. But what if Earth was near the center? Join me as we explore this insane idea. Now, if you know anything about space, you'd probably be quick to figure out if we lived near the center of the Milky Way, we wouldn't last very long. And even if you didn't know that before, well, now you do. But let's talk about why. At the center of the Milky Way, there are billions of stars ready to explode. Aside from the compressed gases and dust that fills the night sky, there are both young and old stars. And some of the older stars are reaching their final stages of life, meaning they're ready to go out with a bang. Quite literally. Upon reaching their final stages, larger stars, we're talking with masses 8 times that of the sun or more, are known to go supernova, which means they explode in on themselves. This explosion results in the destruction of of plenty of space objects, such as asteroids and possibly planets. Meaning if a star relatively close to Earth went supernova, odds of survival wouldn't be in our favor. So I'm sure you can imagine what would happen if Earth was near the center of the Milky Way. We'd most likely perish due to a star going supernova. Aside from the fact that the entire Earth would be burnt to a crisp in a matter of seconds, the radiation released would also lead to the death of the human race. I mean, we wouldn't even make it that far, but if somehow some way the supernova didn't kill you, the radiation certainly would. Now of course there are plenty of other factors here. If the Earth were near the center of the Milky Way, we'd be much hotter, to the point that Earth would cease to exist, and that's without us being hit by a supernova. Being surrounded by all of these incredibly dense stars emitting absurd amounts of gamma, X-ray, and ultraviolet radiation wouldn't bode well for us either. If it isn't clear as day, being placed near the center of the Milky Way is probably one of the least inhabitable places for a planet to be. There's not really much room for life to spawn. But if somehow, some way we were able to get past all the deadly radiation and the possibility that a massive star may explode and destroy Earth, we need to talk about this black hole. Sagittarius A star would most likely absorb us and take us into its core. Unfortunately, scientists can't confirm for sure what happens inside of a black hole, but I can tell you for sure that we would die. Now again, we wouldn't even make it to this point, but if somehow we did, the black hole would most likely welcome us with open arms. There's also the possibility that we become a part of Sagittarius A star's orbit. This is also a bad situation for Earth. As of now, it's believed the Earth's spin is about 1,000 miles per hour. We don't feel it, but it's happening. However, if we were near the center of the Milky Way, that rotation would certainly speed up. We're talking somewhere near 15.5 million miles per hour, and we would definitely feel that here on Earth. We'd also see it. Natural disasters galore. Our gravity would also be all over the place. Life as we know it would cease to exist. And this isn't even due to the fact that we're now rotating at insanely high speeds. It's because we wouldn't be able to live in this area of space in the first place. To wrap up, if you guys can't tell by now, putting Earth anywhere in space that isn't in the habitable zone is always going to end up in our inevitable death. For life on Earth to continue the way it is, we can't really change much. Things are the way they are, and it seems to have worked for us all these years. So maybe we should just keep it that way. Not that we have much say in regards to what our universe does. Looks like we just need to sit back and go along for the ride. However, you guys don't have much to worry about. As previously mentioned, we're tens of thousands of light years away from the Milky Way's core, and it doesn't seem like we're going to end up anywhere near the center anytime soon. Even if we were headed to its center, somehow, some way, we'd die way before we got even close. So none of these should be of any concern. Once again, we'll be exploring a fascinating question involving one of my favorite topics, space. Today's question is, what if the Earth was the only planet? We recently did a video, what if one planet disappeared from our solar system, in which I discussed quite exactly that. What would happen if each one of our planets disappeared from the solar system? Of course, the repercussions range from the end of the world to not much happening, at least here on Earth, depending which planet was removed. Some of the things that happened did happen because there were other planets still involved, which stopped some good or bad things from happening to Earth. But if Earth was the only planet out there, well, that changes everything. As you may or may not know, the solar system works like a well-oiled machine. Every planet does its part to keep things the way they are. Whether that includes Venus's disappearance making the Earth a little bit darker, or Jupiter no longer holding the asteroid belt in place, all the planets in our solar system definitely have a purpose. And if removing one planet has an effect on the solar system, imagine what removing every planet aside from the Earth would do. And if you can't imagine, then just listen carefully, because I'm about to explain. Now, if it isn't obvious enough, without any other planets in our solar system, the odds of the human race surviving is slim to none. As previously mentioned, each planet in the solar system has a purpose, and whether that purpose affects Earth in a big or small way is irrelevant. Without a single planet, there would be changes. Without any of the planets, aside from Earth of course, well, there would most certainly be significant changes. For starters, we don't know where the Earth would end up. The sun's gravitational pull wouldn't necessarily be stronger, so it's not like we'd get pulled into the sun. But there is the possibility that the Earth moves closer to the sun than it already is, and we leave what is known as the habitable zone. This ends up with Earth getting too hot and the human race ceasing to exist because we simply can't stand the scorching hot temperatures. We all die a fiery death. Not a good look. And there's also the possibility the opposite happens. We move further away from the sun, once again no longer in the habitable zone, and the Earth gets extremely cold. We're not talking Canadian winter cold, we're talking Ice Age cold. Then again, what's the difference? All joking aside, we get to the point that we all freeze over and once again, no humans left, no good. And we haven't even gotten to the goods yet. This is what would happen assuming we ended up closer or further away from the sun than we currently are. There's still plenty more that would happen both on Earth and in space if there were no other planets left. At the start of this video, I mentioned Jupiter holds the asteroid belt in place. It also shields the Earth. Two things that wouldn't happen if Earth was the only planet. So if it's not freezing cold or insanely hot temperatures that do us in, it may very well be the thousands of asteroids that would most likely be crashing into the Earth quite frequently. On top of Jupiter no longer acting as the Earth's shield, all the asteroids that are normally sitting in the asteroid belt would start flying all over the place. The odds that we don't get hit by one or two or a few hundred is slim to none. Of course, there's also the fear that we don't have a backup plan in regards to finding a new home. But then again, this would most likely be the least of our concern, considering how Earth wouldn't be habitable in the first place, and we'd all die relatively quickly. So let's talk about Earth. Of course, the gravitational pull of other planets and the way our solar system works helps keep the Earth rotating a certain way. But if the Earth were to move, everything would change. The moon wouldn't have the same effect on Earth it currently does, meaning not only would the Earth be much darker at night, but our oceans would also be all out of whack. The moon's gravitational pull also controls our tides here on Earth, meaning the water wouldn't be moving at all. It'd just sit there. Or would it? We also need to consider that the Earth's rotation would be totally different from what it is now. This would certainly change the way things are on Earth, whether that means our gravity is significantly reduced or natural disasters such as tsunamis or hurricanes and tornadoes start wreaking havoc. Seasons would also change. We wouldn't have the 4 seasons we currently have. Of course, the outcome of the Earth would really depend on where it ended up. Now, one thing is for sure, without the other planets doing what they've been doing all these years, we would most definitely be in some serious trouble. Thankfully, it seems like all of our planets are staying put, at least that we're aware of. Unless some catastrophic event somehow happens and all of the planets are either destroyed or get pushed out of the solar system, I think we'll be okay. Hey guys, how's it going? I'm your host Jared Bronstein and welcome back to LBQ. Today, we got quite an interesting question for you. What if we had to abandon Earth tomorrow? So what would really happen if we all had to abandon Earth tomorrow? Well, I think it goes without saying a lot of us would die. What else is new, right? Welcome to LBQ. But it's so much deeper than that, to be honest. Of course, one of the most important factors here is why we'd have to abandon Earth in the first place. A zombie apocalypse would be much different from, let's say, an asteroid destroying mankind as we know it. But as a generalization, regardless of the reasoning, if we could no longer stay on planet Earth, what would happen? Well, for starters, immediate panic would set in for most. People, myself included, would be freaking out that the end of the world is literally 24 hours away, or less. This would cause people to act in very uncertain ways. Some may decide they didn't want to wait for their inevitable death and just do the deed themselves. Others may accept their fate, get together with their friends and family, and just wait for the demise of the world. But then you got the hopeful. The ones that somehow, someway, will make sure they will safely get off of the planet with their loved ones, including the dog. Can never forget about your dog. As I describe this scenario, I can't help but think of Tom Cruise playing this guy. Anyway, this would cause a very dangerous mentality among our society. Hordes of people will be trying to find escape routes, but the bigger question is, where would they go? Maybe some would go to NASA and try to get their way onto one of their spacecrafts. Or some would just board airplanes, hoping that they could stay airborne for however long the plane allows them to. But then what? It seems logic wouldn't really control us, as we'd be basing our decisions on emotions, fear of the uncertainty. But how would certain countries react? Would it be every man for themselves, or would there be some sort of order? Would the military be called in across the country to control the people, or would they too try to find ways to escape? Knowing their death is inevitable, I feel some would abandon their orders and do what they feel is best for them, while others would stay put and die knowing they did what they were asked to by their commanding officer. Obviously, some people would be able to escape. NASA isn't the only government organization that has capabilities to send people to space. Russia and China also have space agencies that are capable of doing this, and that's what's currently known to the public. In a situation where we'd have to evacuate Earth, I'm sure other government agencies would come forward with prototypes they've been working on and give it a shot, knowing the only other option is to perish here on Earth. Now, it's not like anyone could just get into a spacecraft and take off. There would have to be willing participants helping with the launch and staying on Earth. You'd also need a flight engineer to man the craft. As you can see, there are tons of variables here. For the average person like you or I to get on a spacecraft, well, unfortunately it seems like it may be impossible. But would that be the only solution? As previously mentioned, it depends on the reasoning for the evacuation. If it was a zombie apocalypse, maybe you could just live out in the ocean or on a remote island and you wouldn't have to necessarily abandon Earth. If it was an asteroid of sorts that would hit the Earth, maybe we'd be able to survive by getting into spacecrafts, helicopters, airplanes, jets, and just fly as high as we possibly can while the Earth gets destroyed. And then we come back down when all is said and done. Again, a very unlikely scenario, but it'd be better than just accepting the fact that we're going to die. Ultimately, it seems like most of us unfortunately wouldn't make it beyond whatever impending catastrophic event we'd be bracing for. But what about those that do? Let's say somehow, someway, you were one of the lucky ones that got a seat on a spacecraft. You successfully made it off of our doomed planet. Now what? You're in space with strangers or possibly even some people you know, if you were fortunate enough to be saved with friends or family, and Earth is no longer an option. Would you be confined to that spacecraft the rest of your life? We can't breathe in space. Would you try to inhabit a new planet? Maybe Mars? It seems like a great idea, but to completely colonize an entire planet is quite a hard task. And aside from that, we need to look at the pros and cons of each planet. First, let's look at Mars. It's not too hot to live on, and there is water, but there's also no magnetic field to protect us against radiation. And there are insanely vicious dust storms that could last months. Of course, the temperature is also below freezing, and then the fact that it's mostly carbon dioxide and the gravity there is 38%. So maybe Mars is a no-go. So where would we go? Well, there are two very intriguing planets, Kepler-62e and Kepler-62f. They're believed to be about half the size of Earth and possibly covered by oceans with humid, cloudy skies. This may be your best possible bet if you were lucky enough to somehow escape our doomed planet. But the only issue here, aside from the fact that there isn't nearly enough research done on these planets, they're about 1,200 light years away in the northern constellation Lyra. So aside from the fact that your spacecraft would run out of fuel way before you came even remotely close, you'd definitely die from lack of supplies, whether it be food or water, or just old age. I mean, 1,200 light years away is far. I mean, it's really far. The idea of humans ever exploring these planets in a different constellation is that of a dream. So all in all, it seems that although majority of the world's population would die due to whatever catastrophic event were to cause us to abandon Earth in a day, those lucky enough to get into spacecrafts and fly off into the distance would ultimately die as well. There is no other inhabitable planet, at least that we know of. But depending on what the reasoning for us leaving Earth be, maybe those who escaped could return and start life again on the planet we've embraced. But that's also quite doubtful because it'd be a pretty tough task to get back to Earth without anyone advising you. So all in all, I think it's safe to say the human population would ultimately meet its untimely demise. But again, this is depending what would be the real reason for us abandoning in the first place. As a generalization though, yeah, we'd die.
Now, they often say that too much of a good thing is often bad, but what if we applied that same idiom to the most essential component of our ensured human survival? Oxygen, the breath of life, sweet, sweet, fresh air, the best friend to our lungs, our blood and our brains, and the only reason that we can continue watching this video for the next 9 or so minutes. Oxygen is awesome, and it's safe to say that without it, we wouldn't ever be around to posit ourselves upon this particular hypothetical notion. Now, although we've covered the Earth's supply of oxygen cutting out in various experimental LBQs, today, let's see what life would be like with more of the stuff. And believe me, things would be much more interesting than you might first have expected.
Then shock, convulsions, acidosis.
Is it gonna hurt?
Yeah.
For the curious amongst you, that clip was from the 2000 sci-fi film Red Planet, starring Val Kilmer and Simon Baker, and although that scene in particular was perhaps the complete opposite as to the implications of this life's biggest question, for those of you that have already seen the final events of Red Planet, you'll know that putting oxygen in places that it doesn't belong, more often than not, is a pretty bad thing. But let's forget all about Mars in this particular situation, and instead focus on our own lovable pale blue dot of a planet, Earth. And to first address this hypothetical question, we can actually turn our minds to the long forgotten places of ancient history to get a better handle on how things would play out if the oxygen on Earth doubled. Interestingly enough, through all manners of geology, we can turn the clock back to a time where the abundance of life-giving air was in fact exactly that, double. Well, nearly anyway. Over 300 million years ago, Earth's atmosphere was around 31 to 35% oxygen, nearly a third more than what it is now, and the effects that it had on the flora and fauna that populated our planet at the time were staggering. As we mentioned previously, oxygen is the most important element to us humans, and as far as life is concerned, it is the fundamental building block for life to create energy and vice versa. So then you could easily imagine that with twice the amount of oxygen would come twice the amount of life, or in this case, twice the size of life. Yeah, stick with me. During prehistoric times, in an age where gigantic lizards roamed the earth, even insects were more than twice the size of what they are now. Over eons, as these creatures breathed the densely oxidized environment filtering through their trachea and the spiracles which connect their tissues that need oxygen, the enriched source of atmosphere caused their bodies to expand and rapidly kickstart their evolutionary growth rate. In most cases, dragonflies were the size of hawks, and even smaller species of spiders were the size of large pigeons. There was even a 6-foot centipede roaming around in North America and Scotland. That's pretty terrifying, right? In fact, if the oxygen on Earth doubled right this second to the levels that they were at during the Pennsylvanian period of the Paleozoic era, the effects that it would have on the human body would be immediately staggering compared to the hundreds of thousands of years that these giant insects had to adapt and thrive. If we stepped outside and breathed in the fresh air of an oxygen-doubled environment, we'd more than likely be hit with such an immediate head rush that we'd straight up pass out. Our brains would be drunk off of the dizzying potency of the air itself, and we'd very quickly understand just exactly how delicate our current ecosystem is. However, once we'd adapted to this oxygen-doubled environment, we'd potentially be able to reap a wide variety of anatomical benefits. Due to the brand new abundance and availability of oxygen to your lungs, with every breath you take and every move you make, your physical stamina would increase tremendously. In this new environment, the blood that pumps through your veins would become so oxygen-rich and your muscles so energized that even an averagely healthy human would be able to perform on par with the most capable of professional athletes. Students across the globe would rejoice as the improved circulation of the human body made drastic changes in the effectiveness of human concentration, and even the most astonishing of human minds currently thinking would be inundated with eureka after eureka as their brain gobbled up more oxygen. This newfound productivity for the human race would be incredibly short-lived, and it may quickly seem that too much of a good thing is indeed, in this case, a very bad thing, because in reality, although in the short term our bodies would reap the benefit of double the Earth's oxygen, in the long run it would also slash our lifespan pretty much in half. You see, oxygen is a free radical, and in the scientific world that pretty much means that it does what it wants at a cellular level, often resulting in the detriment of a system. In many ways, oxygen is a double-edged sword. For all its positives, it's also a toxic element. In this case, more oxygen would mean more oxidative stress on our metabolism, which would lead to rapid cellular damage and could even cause adverse effects on our central nervous system. We'd age faster, the cellular structure of our skin would diminish quicker, and all in all, we'd live much shorter lives than what we do now if the oxygen on Earth doubled. And if that didn't hammer home the duplicitous nature of an oxygen-abundant environment, then we'd also need to address the fact that things tend to catch fire the more the oxygen is present. Yeah. Now, although this isn't one of those instant global firestorm type of situations, it could in fact very quickly and very easily lead to one. Again, if we look back at prehistory where the atmosphere was nearly 35% oxygen, the Paleozoic landscape was littered by continent-wide wildfires thanks to the oxygen density having a habit of spurring on even the smallest of combustions. If you lit a campfire on our hypothetical Earth in the middle of a dry forest, it would instantly ignite everything. With the presence of more oxygen as fuel, continental wildfires would become the norm, and humanity better hope that the increased physical capabilities bestowed upon them were put to good use in order to ensure our survival. On the upside though, mountainous regions such as the Himalayas would quickly become much more human-friendly environments, so if the worst came to worse, we could always seek refuge under the shadow of Mount Everest, where the atmospheric pressure would be much easier for us to stomach, or breathe, I guess. If all of this has got you a little worried at the prospect of the Earth suddenly bursting with an abundance of more oxygen, then please don't panic, because thankfully for us, our wonderful planet called Earth has spent millennia cultivating the delicately crafted atmosphere to ensure that we're all comfortable and relatively healthy humans that can happily contribute to our planet's continued success in a perfectly balanced 21% oxygen environment. It took a while to get there, but hey, at least 6-foot centipedes aren't a thing anymore. Hey, what's that out in the distance? Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Oh no, it's an alien planet on a crash collision course with Earth. And that spells only one thing: life on Earth is about to get really, really bad, and also really, really hot. Well, that goes without saying really, doesn't it? But if two great celestial bodies collided anywhere in the universe, the impact alone would be cataclysmic on a cosmic scale and devastating to the solar system for eons to come. But what if it was our cute little pale blue dot? What if I was to tell you it may have already happened before? For the curious amongst you, that clip was from the wholly depressing 2011 film Melancholia by Lars von Trier, because, well, yeah, if Earth smashed into another planet, it would be pretty damn depressing for everyone and everything involved, right? Yeah. Exactly. It illustrates a pretty telling physical response though, because cinema has done a relatively stand-up job of depicting what our sky would look like with another planet looming above us, and if it indeed was on a collision course primed to smash straight into us, all we could really do is grab our loved ones, hold them closely, and hope that we get swallowed by some kind of Deus Ex Machina portal to another dimension, because it would be bad. Like, really, really bad. How do we know that? Well, because of a little thing called the giant impact hypothesis. Let me explain. Have you ever looked up at the moon and thought, hey little guy, Where did you come from? Well, back in 1898, a scientist named George Darwin, as in, yes, the son of our boy Charlie Darwin, hypothesized that the Earth and the Moon were once a single celestial body, and that a proto-molten moon had been creatively spun out of the ejecta from the Earth because of centrifugal forces. Well, he was definitely onto something, but it wasn't until 1975 when doctors William K. Hartman and Donald R. Davis proposed that the Moon was a result of our Earth colliding with a planet-sized body, the collision of which caused the ejecta to gradually coalesce and form the Moon. And they may have been bang on the money. Because the fact is that whole event would have taken a pretty massive celestial body, probably something at least the size of Mars. Well, in fact, that hypothetical proto-planet just so happens to have a title, Theia, named after the mythological Greek titan who gave birth to the moon goddess Selene. Funny how those things work, eh? Well, the components are already there, so let's see precisely how they hypothetically played out. We know that our Earth was born around 4.5 billion years ago, which although sounds like a long time, the fact is it isn't comparative to the age of our universe. During that time though, embryonic planets and proto-worlds were a dime a dozen, floating around, hitting into things, ready to find their own way in the universe. One of those was our special little planet, Earth, doing its thing, trying its best to keep a lid on all the bubbling soup of life below. And then along comes Theia, spinning and spinning, and then boom, she hits us like a bat out of hell. And in that hypothesized instance, we can imagine exactly what life would be like on Earth today if another planet came hurtling at us from the deep void of space. Let's call that planet, oh, I don't know, something sinister like Ultron. If Ultron was roughly the same size as our planet, like Theia, and somehow fell out of the void of space toward Earth, by the time it was visible in the sky as in the same size as the sun or moon, we'd have roughly several weeks before it impacted us, based on the same scale as Earth's escape velocity, which is roughly 11 kilometers per second. In those several weeks, could we do anything to prevent our imminent extinction? Nah, pretty much nothing actually, save the hope of somehow slapping together enough rockets to blast us all the way to Mars and continue the species. But hey, that sounds like a challenge worth taking, right? For the most part though, we'd have a few weeks to slowly witness our demise coming ever closer and closer. I mean, I wouldn't really want to paint the picture on what kind of globally depressing environment that would create, but imagine that you're sat at a really awkward dinner table, except everyone on Earth is there and everyone's really sad. I mean, I imagine that some of us would light bonfires on the beaches, dancing around in a bright burst and a lust for life, shouting out into the cosmic void that, hey, we existed, if not for a short time, but hey, we were here, human beings. For the most part though, yeah, it would suck. Once the clock had finally run down though for a few split seconds before impact, we'd witness the planet Ultron up close and personal, and it would terrifyingly fill our sky from one side of the horizon to the other. That is, if you're lucky enough to be on the side of the Earth that witnessed the point of impact. Because a few nanoseconds before impact, both planets' collective atmospheres would glow brightly as they were suddenly cataclysmically compressed. In those last few moments, you'd be atomically vaporized by the heat and light released from the impact, and you definitely wouldn't be smushed to death by some alien rock face. However, if you were on the other side of the planet, you'd have very little warning about how messed up things are about to get for you. Suddenly you'd have to deal with the ground beneath you turning into an unpredictable trampoline made of rock and molten magma, with the motivation of slinging you off into the atmosphere. If you didn't realize, that's a very bad thing also, due to the fact that you can't breathe in space and you'd have nowhere left to go. All of that smashed up Earth would need to go somewhere though, and due to a little scientific function known as a Roche limit, the resulting ejecta as well as its atmosphere would be loosely kept inside the Earth's gravitational field, but would also be kept inside Ultron's new gravity, and for a moment the world's gravity would suddenly be pointing sideways. That means, yeah, you know that new treehouse you just built? See you later. What a waste of time. But all jokes aside, all life on Earth would end, because we have to point back to the giant impact hypothesis where our moon was created from a devastating collision with the protoplanet Theia. In all likelihood though, if we added Ultron to the equation, we'd more than likely end up with another moon, or maybe even several from the massively ejected ejecta. So, hey, that's pretty cool, right? Although, we wouldn't be around to see it. It's a very real fear, an asteroid hurtling through our solar system, avoiding the protective gravitational tug of our best friend Jupiter, and revving up like a Super Saiyan Goku right through our atmosphere before plummeting straight into the deep blue sea. Boom, hellfire and pain, and 90% of the Earth's population snuffed out from existence. It happened to the dinosaurs, heck, it probably happened a few times after that too. Our society is obsessed with the thought of an extinction level asteroid event, or well, the Hollywood heroic avoidance of one. Armageddon, Deep Impact, and a million other other B-movies that paint the picture of a post-apocalyptic, post-asteroid society. Well, what would that world look like? How would the few survivors maintain their fragile existence? Let's find out, shall we? Hello internet and welcome back to the most inquisitive channel on YouTube, Life's Biggest Questions. As always, I'll be your disembodied floating voice as we look to the skies, shield our eyes from the brilliantly bright, blinding light, and curiously ask the question, what if an asteroid destroyed 90% of Earth? Roll the clip. Now, before we approach the latter half of this question, we have to first paint the picture of the initial asteroid impact event. The actual devastation caused depends on quite a few factors, such as the size, speed, angle, and landing point of the cosmic destroyer. If it's 10 feet across, in all likelihood, it would skip across the atmosphere like a far-flung skimming stone and burst into a pretty little fireworks explosion in the sky. 100 feet across and people start getting a little twitchy and it would cause a massive explosion like the one witnessed at Tunguska in Russia on the morning of June 30th, 1908. If it's a quarter mile wide, it would take out an entire region roughly the size of Virginia, and the subsequent fallout would be a game changer for how our civilization developed into the future. And if it's 10 kilometers wide, then we're all pretty boned, and the ones who are initially vaporized by the global impact are the lucky ones. And that's the asteroid that we'd be looking at to answer this question, likely being flung out from the Oort cloud, a thick bubble of icy debris that surrounds our solar system. An extinction level event, the end of all things, the big rocky herald of the likely goodbye of humanity. Bye. At 10 kilometers wide, the asteroid would travel at around 30 kilometers per second, which is roughly 90 times the speed of sound. Unlike smaller meteors, an asteroid that size would be unstoppable and have no semblance of slowing down as it travelled through our atmosphere. It would punch through in less than 3 seconds like it's not even there, like a hot knife through butter and all other synonyms that relate to things passing through things with ease. Like a perturbed ghost through a wood-panelled wall. You get the picture. Either way, when it hits the surface, it would hit so hard that it wouldn't even matter where the point of impact occurred. Land or sea, it's not good, guys. Most people within a 100-mile radius would either drop dead from the initial concussion of the compression wave, or perhaps even more likely be completely vaporized by the wave of destruction and devastation. And you know what? That's possibly the most comforting end. They're the lucky ones because they would most likely never even know what hit them. Because what would remain would be a world much worse than The Road, Mad Max and The Walking Dead combined. There would be nothing left. It would be the literal definition of a wasteland, and the 10% of Earth's remaining population are in for a pretty tough remainder of their fragile lives. The energy of the impact would likely vaporize a large amount of the Earth's crust, throwing all of the subsequent ejecta into the air, unleashing devastating winds across the planet filled with debris and rock and destruction that could reach more than 1,000 miles an hour. Umbrellas ain't gonna save us this time. Unimaginable earthquakes would follow, shaking the planet to its very core and likely bring ruin to our most iconic cities on a global scale. The ejecta would continue through to the atmosphere, heating up to temperatures possibly near 900 degrees, aka that sweet melting point that turns lead to liquid. It would trigger global forest fires and likely cook anyone and anything not sheltered deep underground. But 10% of Earth's population is roughly 750 million people. And, well, that's a lot of survivors to throw into this equation. And a lot of people who are smart, concise, or lucky enough to get shipped into a deep underground bunker to shield them from the years of destruction waging its way across our fair planet. Essentially, it would be the plotline of 1998's Deep Impact. But what we're concerned with are the years that would follow, if, of course, our underground safety bunkers did their job and we didn't succumb to chaos and mutiny inside, killing each other in a frantic post-apocalyptic existential panic. I'm looking at you, Vault 19. The combination of dust, debris and soot from the ejector's influence would remain in the atmosphere for several years, blocking out the sun, and without the glorious power of our solar overlord, praise the sun, the vast majority of Earth's plant life would die, and as a result, the entire food chain would collapse. So we better hope that our bunkers are stocked with some highly resourceful agricultural technology, because we wouldn't be growing anything out in the open for quite some time. Also, pizza is probably off the menu, and don't even get me started on what a bleak existence that would be. But, and as always, this is a very big but, there is hope for us all. Humanity is a very resilient species. It's the reason that we are who we are, and the reason that we've managed to clamber through the primordial soup and build colossal monuments into the sky. A survivor population of 750 million would bring us roughly back to the global population of the 1600s, a time where humanity was shaking off the shackles of feudalism and stepping out into a brave new world. With the same population, we'd essentially be given a fresh start once a decade or so had passed and the planet had begun rejuvenating its delicate yet resilient ecosystem. However, this time the survivors would have the foresight that humanity's future is fragile because they've seen the consequences, they've lived through them, and the fear of a similar man-made catastrophe would become the benchmark that would rebuild our civilization upon. Unfortunately for them, the dinosaurs never had a second chance, but maybe, just maybe, we would.
You can't feel it, but it's happening. It affects your day, your year, your life. Without it, your life would not be the same. Without it, you would probably die. I am, of course, talking about the Earth's rotation. The Earth rotates at nearly 1,000 miles per hour at its equator, spinning on its axis. To cut a long story short, the Earth rotates due to the hydrogen gases and angular rotation, completing its revolve every 24 hours. This allows for night and day as faces of the globe turn away or turn to greet our sun. Life as we know it is wholly tied to this movement. Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions, the channel that looks to answer exactly those. I'm Rebecca Felgate, and today we're asking the pretty scary question of what would happen if the Earth stopped spinning. Spoiler alert, it isn't pretty. It is worth mentioning to avoid confusion that the Earth's spin is not the same as its orbit around the sun. The sun's gravity keeps us in orbit. What would happen if we fell out of the sun's orbit is a different but similarly catastrophic question. But for now, we're assuming that we are still in the sun's orbit, but the Earth's natural rotation has stopped. At the moment, we are currently spinning along with the Earth and are held down by gravity. We can't feel how fast we're going because of the momentum, the same way you can't feel how fast you're traveling in a plane or car. If the Earth suddenly stopped spinning, it does not mean that we would, as the Earth would still be orbiting around the sun. Like applying the emergency brakes on a car and jerking forward, everything on Earth would launch sideways to the east at almost 1,000 miles per hour, the same rate as our Earth's former rotation. This means that people, buildings, trees, cars, animals would all be launched into an unsurvivable spin. The Earth's rotation controls gravity, which we would lose if it stopped, but this would not mean we would be flung off the planet, because we would be traveling far too slowly. The Earth's escape velocity is 40,000 kilometers an hour. The spinning would be worse the closer you were to the equator. Those far, far away at the very northern tip of Greenland or the Arctic and Antarctic wouldn't feel too much. This is because the northern and southern extremities of the Earth barely rotate. They're only seasons coming from the Earth's orbit of the sun, meaning at the moment, some places get almost 24 hours of sunlight in the summer and 24 hours of darkness in the winter. Closer to the equator, if you were able to miraculously survive the violent spinning, you may not be able to deal with the 1,000-mile-per-hour winds, smashing debris into you and other debris. This surge would also cause huge tidal waves and tsunamis, washing over cities up to 17 miles inland. If you thought that the tidal wave was bad, wait and see what will happen to the oceans over time. Currently, the oceans bulge around the equator thanks to our spinning. However, if the Earth stopped spinning, the oceans would be drawn to the poles because they would be the places with the most gravity. This would flood huge parts of the world, anywhere north of Chicago and Portland, so goodbye Canada. Almost all of Europe would be underwater too, meaning huge loss of life and infrastructure. Basically, those who avoided the chaotic spinning close to the equator would drown as the ocean submerged their homes. The ocean around the equator would effectively packed up and left, creating a huge supercontinent like a belt around the globe. Without the ocean, the level of drought along the belt would be very high. Of course, with all this ocean moving, a huge percentage of marine life will also die. Like the ocean, the Earth's atmosphere would be drawn to the magnetic poles if we stopped spinning. This would mean a very, very thin, probably non-survivable atmosphere around the middle continental belt. Without the Earth's constant spinning, there would be no night and day like we know it. Instead of a day being 24 hours, it would be 365 days long. There would be 6 months of summer and 6 months of winter, meaning extreme heat in some parts of the Earth for the extended periods of time and extreme cold in others. This would be chaotic for wildlife wildlife and for humans alike. Earth's magnetic field is a result of its constant spinning, and we need this field to protect us from harmful solar flares. Without it, if the Earth stopped spinning, a solar flare could roast many of us alive. Again, the increased summer temperature and high wind would also mean dramatically more forest fires. The final icing on the cake is that without the Earth spinning, the moon would eventually smash into us. It would take millions of years and we would all be long dead, but blimey, what a collision. The only chance we would have of survival if the Earth stopped spinning would perhaps be to live underground, where we would not feel the effects of the chaos above us. Even then, we may never be able to leave and live life as we know it. Also, sunlight is pretty key to our survival, think of that. The moon, our cheeky little orbital. The moon is less than a third of the size of the Earth in diameter. According to our mates NASA, if the Earth were the size of a nickel, the moon would be a coffee bean. But what if Earth was bean-sized? So, Earth the size of the moon. What would that be like? Right now the Earth has a diameter of 12,742 kilometers and the moon just 3,474 kilometers. That is, if my sometimes dodgy math were correct, 27% the size of the Earth, so between a quarter and a third of the size. Assuming the makeup of the Earth was much the same but we just shrunk, well, things would be very different, obviously. The Earth would have less mass, which means that it would rotate faster than it does right now. Currently, the Earth rotates on its axis every 24 hours. This is an Earth day. If the Earth were just 27% of its current size, then days and nights would be much quicker. The least of our issues would be sleep patterns, although yes, this would be strange to us indeed. And if Earth had always been teeny and fast, well maybe we would have evolved differently, as our brains would work differently with a different measure of sleep. While the length of the day would be shorter, the length of a year would change too, and perhaps the gravity of the sun would have a greater effect on us, drawing us closer, which would mean fiery hot death. Although, let's just assume we stay put for the sake of this video for now. So on the topic of gravity, if the Earth were moon-sized, even with our same structure, our same core, the mass of the Earth of course would alter, which means our gravity would change too. With less gravity and a faster spin, we could be in danger of losing our breathable atmosphere, which could mean being exposed to harmful radiation, and worryingly, losing some of our oxygen. This would have a profound effect on plant life. The smaller the planet, the faster it cools, which means less geothermal energy. If our core cools, we will use the Coriolis effect, which has happened to our neighbor mate Mars. This means we would be at even greater risk of losing our atmosphere. Okay, so a smaller Earth on a physics level isn't looking great, but what about on an anthropological level? How would we humans handle having less space but the same population? There are 7.5 billion people on Earth. In the year 1900, there were just 1.6 billion. In 120 years, we've gained 6 billion people, and that is actually mental. So where would we fit everyone? Funnily enough, we'd fit alright. If everyone on Earth stood shoulder to shoulder, we would all fit in the space of roughly 500 square miles, so a city roughly the size of Phoenix, Arizona. Right now, there is 57,308,738 square miles of land on Earth, although about 33% is desert and 24% is mountainous regions. Subtracting this uninhabitable 57% still leaves 24,642,757 square miles of habitable land. If Earth were moon-sized, we would have 6,653,544 miles of habitable Earth to play with, which really is enough to physically fit all of us comfortably. The issue, however, comes from having enough land to farm with enough fresh water to drink. With the Earth the size it is right now, we're already struggling. There simply wouldn't be enough resources. A smaller Earth just couldn't sustain the current population. Maybe we could pull a Xenu and round people up, pop them in a volcano and nuke them. Niche Scientology references, anyone? Good. Great. If Earth is moon-sized, what about the actual moon? Would that be Earth-size? If so, it would be a tidal wave nightmare and we would start orbiting it. If it stayed moon-sized, however, perhaps we would be two wee cosmic sisters. Perhaps our gravities would influence one another and we would create a gravitational vortex between us. Ultimately though, questions like this are very hard to answer on a deep and intricate level, because everything on Earth is the way it is because the Earth is the way it is. We've evolved to our Earth, we are the way we are, and life is the way life is because of the conditions Earth has given us. Maybe if Earth were moon-sized, we will have evolved to be miniature versions of ourselves, but then again maybe not. The likelihood is there wouldn't be life at all, or as we know it anyway. Sorry, Tiny Earth, you just aren't the one.